Good morning. Thank you for being here. Thanks to every year I wonder, are people really going to come? And then they do. So I thank you for being here, and I thank you to the 100 countries on the live stream. If you think about 100 countries, you got to think about the many different time zones that are represented, and therefore what time of day it is in so many places. It's nice, bright, early in the morning for us. We have live streamers at all hours of the day, including some absolutely in the middle of the night. So for those dedicated few, where it's midnight or later, thank you for being here. It is always an honor to bring such an incredible community together, and I thank you for being here. I have to correct something that Jennifer said, not as a criticism, but for something for us all to remember. This is not something that I created. So I wrote the book, it's true, and when the press needs to talk to somebody about Lean Startup, I'm one of a couple people that they call, and that's been good for me in my life, so I appreciate that. Thank you all for making that possible. But I didn't make this or create this. Last night at the Ignite Talks, we were talking about the creation of the Lean Startup community. I was recounting a story that the first time someone asked me for permission to create a Lean Startup meetup, they said, well, I'm thinking about doing this meetup group to discuss Lean Startup. Do you think it would be a good idea? I was like, no. That does not sound like a good idea to me. But you don't need my permission. What does that mean? You could do whatever you want. That seems like a waste of time, but good luck. And they did it without my approval, and they did it anyway, and hundreds of people showed up, and it was a huge success. And then next thing I knew, it was spreading from city to city. I didn't create that or make that. The global community of people who have made the Lean Startup movement what it is, are you in this room and people listening in. They're the ones who deserve the credit for this. And so I just want to make sure we all recognize that. Now, what's interesting, every year we do this conference, and I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, but not as many as you would think. Because the vast majority of people every year who come to the conference are brand new to Lean Startup. In fact, every year, at least somebody comes up to me at some point of the conference to shake my hand. They usually tell me, I read your book yesterday. I was on a plane, and I just thought, oh, this is cool, and I Googled, learned more about it, and I was like, there's a conference, and it's tomorrow. I got to be there. And so there's somebody in the audience who read the book yesterday, and I welcome you, and so many others. So the reason we build the conference primarily around networking and the chance to meet other people in the community is because, even though this is our 6th year, the vast majority of people who are ever going to hear about Lean Startup in this world have not yet heard about it today. So even though sometimes you can feel like, well, I'm kind of late to the party, you're actually quite early in the grand scheme of things. And so I really want to encourage you to feel like there's not some set of insiders who know the community well or anything like that. The people who are around you are as new as you are, and I encourage you to meet them and to connect. And in fact, someone was talking to me before the conference. He said, it's going to be really nice for a change not to have to argue about Lean Startup for a couple days. You know what I'm talking about? The resistance we all face every day. When we are evangelizing this new set of ideas and trying to convince people, and there's, people in their organization, in their comfort zone, are used to doing things a certain way, and it can feel hard to push them out of that. And so, enjoy a couple days off from the resistance and the confusion and the difficulty, and enjoy meeting people who share a passion with you. But don't take a few days off from critical thinking and from skepticism. It's really easy for us to get excited about how far we've come as a movement and how many people are here and in the live streams in the 100 countries. I feel like it's very easy to feel like we made it, we did it, the battle is won. But if you think about what I said a minute ago, that the vast majority of people who need this message have not heard it yet, that means that not only is the battle not won, it's only just begun. We're only in the very early chapters of this. There's a lot of people yet still working in the old way. I travel the world now, and I meet companies of every conceivable size and sector, industry. I mean, I have just worked on some crazy stuff. If you look at the program last night and today, the case studies we were presenting, from breakfast cereals to high science to consumer products to electronics, energy, I mean, you name it, there's examples. So all over the place, and yet everywhere I go, I still see the same things. I see waterfall product development. I see people who are convinced they already know what customers want. I see people working in functional silos. And I see organizations that, as they grow, ossify and become bureaucratic and slow down. And everyone just says, well, that's just how it is when you get big or when your company is old. But it can't be right, because I meet with companies that are 5 years old and that are 105 years old, and they're having the same problems. I meet with governments and nonprofits, and we're all having these same problems. And everywhere that I have gone, I have seen that there are opportunities to reverse that trend. It is not an inevitable thing. And that's really what I want us to talk about today, what does it mean to be a modern company, a modern organization, one that grows through continuous innovation and that leads to sustained growth over time? Growth not just in revenue and profit, but in impact, actually living up to the rhetoric we throw around so casually of making the world a better place. And I don't know about you, I think maybe the most cliche thing you ever hear now in business is that we want to think like a startup. You guys sick and tired of this already? Every company, we are going to be a startup forever. Every startup I meet with that's had success and has a few hundred, a few thousand employees, like they're going to stay a startup forever. Every big company wants to become like a startup. It's almost like a joke. Most companies I talk to, when someone says that, everyone's rolling their eyes and be like, oh, great. But I always ask this question to the managers I meet with who say that to me. I say, oh, that's great. Being like a startup, that sounds good. Who's in charge of that? Whose job is it to make sure that that happens? And most people look at me and they're like, well, it's everybody's job, I guess. And we all know everybody's job means nobody's job. So we have this intention, we want to be more innovative, we want to think like a startup, but who's responsible for it? Who sets the standards for entrepreneurial thinking in the organization? Who makes sure that the rules and requirements and bureaucracy and process that we adopt as part of our success still permits entrepreneurial thinking? In fact, most companies, most middle managers I meet, they are paid to make sure no innovation happens. It's their job. And when I say that to most CEOs, they get so mad at me. I'm like, listen, you pay people in this company to make sure nobody innovates. They're like designed to eradicate it. They get angry. How can you say that thing to me? But I said, listen, we all have inherited a management system that is based on standardization of work and the elimination of variation. That is, you read any management text from the 20th century, the deep thinkers going all the way back to Ford and Deming and Taylor, it's all about standardization. And that made perfect sense for when we are trying to manage under situations of relative certainty. And of course, in the Lean Startup movement, we talk all the time about what do you do when you're in a world of high uncertainty? How do you deal with the fact that sometimes we're going to get positive variation? So the people in the organization whose job it is to standardize work, to make sure everyone is on the same page and working to the same standard, their job is to prevent variation, which means prevent innovation. So what do we do about it? That's the conversation we're going to have over the next couple of days. What does it mean to be a modern company where innovation is not just permitted but welcomed? And I want to kind of sketch out what I think is an interesting outline of this, this new picture that is starting to emerge. And I want to tell you kind of three strands of thought that kind of combine into this. You're going to hear, over the next couple of days, you're going to hear from the classic Silicon Valley startups, the hyper-growth companies that are in the news every day that we all, those of us who grew up in the Valley or find ourselves of that Silicon Valley mindset want to be. And we're going to hear from some very large organizations, some of the world's largest, that have adopted Lean Startup and used it to build a transformation. And we're going to hear from some governments. People hear that like lean government, isn't that an oxymoron? But it's the government story I want to pick up on because these three strands have more in common than people think. And when I travel and talk, nobody ever believes me when I say that. So these three situations have a lot in common. And so last year at the conference, we got to hear the story of healthcare.gov. Anyone remember healthcare.gov, the big mega government disaster project? And we got to hear from some of the folks who led the transformation, the rescue effort to save healthcare.gov and therefore have major influence over the course of political history in the United States. And what's interesting about the healthcare.gov, and this is like a trick I want to teach everybody. I've used this a lot since the healthcare.gov disaster and subsequent rescue. I meet with CIOs and executives from companies and I say, tell me about a new initiative you're planning. And they'll say, oh, we have this plan, we're going to build this thing, we've got the requirements figured out. And I say, oh, the healthcare.gov plan. I'm sure it'll work out great for you. And so many, they get so mad when you say that to me. It's like, how dare you suggest? I say, well, let me draw you a little chart of what healthcare.gov did, right? Big requirements planning up front, everyone working in separate individual silos, a huge absence of accountability or integration testing. Right? So you walk through the list, and let me walk you through what you're planning to do. Oh, the same. So why would you think you're going to get a different result? So you can try this at home. It's very effective because it's this large-scale failure. But what's really interesting about it is not the rescue and the failure itself, but what has happened afterwards. I was just in DC a few weeks ago, and because of that crisis, the people in the federal government who have been for years, through the entirety of the Obama administration and some before, advocating for lean startup in government, for agile practices in software procurement, for a customer-centered, user-centered design process for government products. Those people got thrust into the limelight and were given a huge opportunity to build change. And that pattern is something we see in a lot of different organizations. The kind of critical mass of pre-planning and voices in the wilderness. For some of you, that's you. I've been crying out for this for how many years? Comes to be a point where you achieve a critical mass and you realize, the executive leadership of the organization says, okay, now I see that this is the way, and this thing needs to be the way that we work across the whole organization. I have seen that pattern play out in hypergrowth startups, in big companies, in governments alike, and it's pretty exciting. So I guess what I want you to be thinking about as we go into our talks and breakouts and meetups and opportunities to talk to each other is, are you ready for that moment when it comes? Because I think it can feel impossible. It can feel like you're converting people one person at a time, hand-to-hand combat style, to lean startup. It can feel like that's not big enough, that's not fast enough, that's not going to get me where I need to go. And yet so many of our speakers will attest to once you reach the critical mass, once you hit that tipping point, it happens faster than you think. So we hope over the next few days we will prepare you for the challenge of leadership in a modern company.